The following is a conversation with Dr. Scott Goldman, a pioneer in sports psychology and co-creator of the Athletic Intelligence Quotient, AIQ. Dr. Goldman's groundbreaking work has helped athletes and teams across the NFL, NBA, MLB, and beyond unlock their mental edge, improve decision-making, and achieve peak performance. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast, where we explore innovation, high performance, and impact in sports and beyond. I'm your host, Sid Bensalah. Today, we're diving deep into how Dr. Goldman's blend of science, psychology, and storytelling in changing the way we understand sports intelligence. Let's get started. Scott, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Your path to sports psychology is fascinating, from child psychology to co-creating the AIQ. What drew you to this field and how did your journey unfold?
Good question. I think I've always been somewhat of a curious explorer. And as much as I like to go on journeys and quests externally, like going rock climbing in mountains or, cliff diving in oceans and stuff, I also really like introspective journeys and exploration. So I've always been fascinated by what makes people choose the choices that they make. So for example, when you went to the store and purchased those glasses, I'm going to guess that you had a lot of different designs, shapes, colors to consider and look from. And as you went through that process, you went, these seem more fun, these seem more professional, this feels more like me, that kind of stuff. So I think all behavior has meaning. And I just was fascinated by it. And, the type of glasses you choose to wear is a fairly simple choice. Then you start to talk about more significant choices like, do I marry this person or do I take this professional career path or, and so I started with this real fascination in psychology. And I played competitive soccer, and given there's probably a more international audience, what Americans call soccer, you all call football, of course. And so I started off playing that fairly competitively. Like I was in the Olympic developmental program for a few years and I played semi-professional, but I mean, nowhere near the quality or output of the athletes I currently work with. So I rarely even put my athletic resume because it's laughable by comparison. But being fascinated by psychology and these decision makings and these adventures that people go on, and also having a real passion and love for sports, it was kind of like watching these two things get mashed together. I was like, wow, I had no idea. And so I found myself kind of gravitating towards extremes, like as heart-wrenching and disturbing as it is to help someone who is at their worst day, suicidal, maybe having auditory and visual hallucinations, real psychotic breaks. I mean, it's powerful. And I found myself going, wow, I think if I could make impact in someone's lives during that kind of intensity, it just felt really, I had a passion for that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, the idea of someone who's trying to win an Olympic record or someone who's trying to win a national championship or a world championship or, just that quest for greatness, I found myself really intrigued by that puzzle too. And then as I started to work in both domains, I'm like, what's kind of interesting to me is there's some parallels, the idea of, well, I'll throw this out there, and thanks for giving me the ability to just kind of ramble for a sec. But
Sure.
Having worked with people who have won a Super Bowl, having worked with people who have won an NBA World Championship, I have the opportunity where I ask them, what was that like for you? And the number one answer I hear is relief. It's not joy. It's not like, oh my God, that was the best. That was amazing. What they say to me right after the moments, they go, I felt relief. And when you pull on that thread a little bit, you start to hear about some of the torment of the almost like obsessive compulsive, they're compelled to greatness, right? Like they have to do these things. We try to relabel it a lot, and you see this like in TikTok videos, like, oh, you got to have that want and you got to have that desire. But I find some of these folks, it really is almost like an obsessive compulsive disorder in a way where there is this, they're compelled to do the things that others don't do.
Mm.
So I just found the psychology of this extremeness to be fascinating. And I said, I wonder if there's ways that I can contribute or help, whether it's ease the suffering or allow for the pursuit without the suffering or minimizing the suffering kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. You were one of the first embedded psychologists in collegiate sports. What was that experience like, and what challenges did you face?
Well, the experience, that's a good question. I haven't been asked that question in a long, long time. Uh, I knew this was going to be a fun interview because, I mean, just the way that you thought and the way you think and the email exchange, I was like, man, this guy thinks deeply. So this is going to be cool. Um, Here's what I kind of discovered and the way I would describe it to folks. If you've ever taken a snow trail hike in the mountains after fresh fallen snow, so there is no path, there is something so pure and beautiful about it. Like, it almost feels like you're the first person seeing this world kind of thing. And you just taken away in the awe and glory of how beautiful that nature is. At the same time, barreling through 4 feet of snow, and again, my apologies, I don't know how to convert feet to meters. I'm just an
No,
ignorant
no
American,
worries.
but like
No
but
worries.
like the while at the same time where you're basking in the glory of this awesomeness,
Mhm.
barreling through 4 feet of snow is really, it takes a lot of hard work and effort. And sometimes you look behind you and you see all these people who are going like, "Hey man, thank you for pounding, pounding the pavement down. Thank you for kind of pounding the trail." And you're like, "Hey, you're welcome." And so I would say that's kind of what it was like. The other part of the question you asked was like, what was one of the challenges, I think.
Mhm.
And I would say, I think the challenge, and it remains to this day, 30 years later, I don't think we did a very good job of defining what it is.
Mhm.
Psychology is, in my humble opinion, the study of human behavior and human interaction, if I were to try to simplify it as best I can. And when you say, okay, if psychology is the study of human behavior and human interaction, well, that pretty much talks about everything and everyone in some variation. So we can sit in space and make impact in so many different ways that I think we've lost the ability to create role clarity. So I was interviewing, oh man, gosh, this was like 20 years ago. I was interviewing for a Major League Baseball team, and I'm talking to the team president, and he was all over the place with these questions he was asking. And I finally said, you present to me like a guy who just bought a restaurant and is looking to hire a chef, but you have no idea what kind of restaurant you want. Do you want it to be American food? Do you want it to be Indian? Do you want it to be Thai or Vietnamese? Like, there's so many beautiful flavors out
Mhm.
there. And he took a moment, digested the statement, goes, "You know what? You're right. Like, we're committed to this. We just don't know what this is." And so I have found for the last 30 years, I've been trying to help clarify what sports psychology can be.
Mhm.
Um, and what's interesting is I find sometimes my perspective is contrary to popular opinion or industry standards. So I'll give you a concrete example. I see psychology and sports psychology as being like a blend and a blur of 3 buckets or domains. One is mental health, again, talking about like suicidal
Hmm.
ideation or drug-induced psychosis or, those kinds of things. One is mental wellness or peak performance. And again, that's the, hey, what kinds of things can we do to train the brain to be ready for the biggest moment of my life kind of stuff. And then the third domain is, okay, I call it system dynamics because I feel like culture is a saturated word.
Hmm.
But what we're really talking about, whether we call it culture or system, but it's really about how human beings work in a collective setting. Because even in individual sports, there's a team. Like tennis players have coaches, and stuff like that. Boxers have, trainers and things. So um, I think what's unfortunate and where I kind of buck the trend of the community is because most people are trained with a great level of depth in one of those spaces, they want to separate it. Well, I do this and you can hire someone else to do that kind of thing. And I've just always found throughout my professional career it to be more of a blend and a blur that when you have a toxic environment, when the culture is not right, like when the system dynamics and the relationships are fractured,
Toxic.
people's yeah, people suffer.
Yeah.
And when people suffer, I think it impacts their emotional health. And when I think people's emotional health is at jeopardy, I think their performance goes down. And I think the reverse goes, right?
Yeah.
Like when people are in a slump, they tend to be a little bit more irritable, and that impacts their relationships and it impacts their health and well-being. So I don't understand the two things that I would love to watch happen as the next evolution of this field is that we have clarity of the work.
Hmm.
The same way you would if you were to go see a dentist. Good dentist, bad dentist, but at least you know what a dentist
Hmm.
does. And that role clarity would be a comprehensive or holistic service.
Yeah.
So that way, when the player comes into the office and says, I'm struggling shooting a free throw, and you start doing like some pre-routine kind of mechanisms, they then elicit some deeper rooted psychosis or some uprooted childhood trauma that you don't have to transfer that care. You can just kind of stick with the person
Mm.
and help them unlock all of the different barricades and obstacles.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Scott, what's one lesson from your early career that still shapes how you approach your work today?
My early career, another good question. There's been a lot. Um, there's been a lot of lessons. Um, gosh, um, if you get the person right, you get the player right.
Hmm.
That these humans that are trying to do amazing things are still somebody's daughter, they're still somebody's son, they're still somebody's brother or sister. If they're shaving and they cut themselves, it bleeds just the same as you and I. And I think the reason why I find that to be a valuable lesson is sometimes it's very easy to watch some of these individuals on TV and think that they are a character in a story, because I think one thing that draws us as fans to sports is the drama. We
Hmm.
love the buildup, we love the moment. And so sometimes we can depersonalize them. I have been on the sidelines of like an NFL team, National Football League, where I'm standing next to a player and the fan base is yelling things at this player that was so unkind
Wow.
and so painful. And I just remember sitting in that space with him, and he's got a job to do,
Hmm.
and sometimes I wonder if the fans even know if they realize or recognize that they can be heard. Like, do they think they're just kind of making noise and that they're doing this for comedic value for everybody around them? Or do they really mean it? Do they really hate this guy? You know,
Mhm.
like, but the things they were saying to this guy and the fact that he kind of turned to me and was like, this really hurts. You know,
Mm.
and it was in the middle of the game. And, we
Yeah.
were within 3 points. Like, it was like fourth quarter, 10 minutes left, down by three. It was a great moment.
Mm.
And this guy was, I mean, the insults were like, they were personal, they were racist, it was like,
Yeah.
and so I was just like, I don't think I don't understand how we've set up a work environment that permits this.
Mhm.
Where else, like, I just couldn't imagine, like, if I worked in a bank, after, customers walked in and were like,
Yeah.
saying stuff to the bank teller. I
Yeah.
don't know. That
Unfortunately,
was a lesson.
yeah, the case you described, Scott, it's happening all the time. Football, soccer matches here in Europe quite often, almost all the time. You have insults, racial slurs and stuff like, and the player, they just stop and leave the pitch.
Yeah.
And it
And
doesn't.
I respect that,
Yeah,
you know?
and it doesn't.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
well, I know I've been so long-winded. I really wanna hear what you have to say, but I'll forget this thought. I also don't wanna vilify the fan, right? Like, in
No.
some ways, I'm grateful for their passion. Like, I love how committed they are. Like, if they didn't have that passion, could it be directed in a different way?
It's
Wouldn't that be nice?
it's a social phenomenon. The
Yeah.
fans, when they go to the stadium, they sit on the chair. It's the only feature they have to get everything out. You know, all the struggle, the issues, the problems they have in their lives, in their career, and stuff like that. But then it's a social phenomenon, and it gets so aggressive. And I think most of the time, if we ask the question, do they really mean what they're saying? You know, but then on the other hand, Scott, how do you shield a player, an athlete, from this?
So, I find one of the greatest cures is education.
Hmm.
So one of the interventions, and the intervention I used in the moment I was describing earlier, is I got really scientific. I try to do 2 things. One is I try to be compassionate and empathic, but I can't say like, "Hey, man, I know how you feel," right? Because I don't, especially with the racial slurs. Um, but what I could do is I could be compassionate. So I put my arm around him and I said, like, "I got you. I got your back. And how can I help?" And he kinda looked at me and was like, "You know what? Just you saying that means a lot." Like, and then again, in that compassionate, empathic kind of way, I said to him, like, something that I took from Mr. Rogers. I don't remember the 1970s television star Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers,
Hmm.
but he was all about kind, and he always said, like, in crisis, look to the helpers, right? Like, if you're scared and you don't know what to do, look to the helpers. So I kinda took a page out of Mr. Rogers's book, and I just said, "Look, like, there's a lot of people who really respect and admire you and really love you too." And I said, just look to your teammates, look to your coaches, look to your family. Like,
Mm.
these folks that are out here saying this stuff, like, you don't have to give them the value
Yeah.
of their words. So I did that as the first approach. And then the second approach is I said, let's talk about oxytocin. And it's funny because, again, this was during the middle of the game, and it's amazing, the kinds of conversations you can get into, and credit him for being able to kind of like shift gears.
Hmm.
And he's like, "Well, tell me about oxytocin." I go, "Well, we can talk about it tomorrow." He goes, "No, no, no, I'm curious." So I said, "Oxytocin is the chemical that makes you feel bonded to people." It used to be called like the love chemical, but now they're talking it as the tribal chemical. It's the chemical that brings us and bonds us to people. I said, it's the chemical that's released in the locker room when we're all jumping and cheering and hugging and crying with each other. And he goes, "Yeah, I feel that." I go, "The interesting thing about oxytocin is, as much as it brings you together, it also encourages you to hate anything that's outside your tribe." So oxytocin elicits an us versus them mentality.
Mm.
So I think this fan who just spent $800 or whatever it was for him and his friends to go to this game, they have an oxytocin bond to our opponents. So they love their team and they hate us, not because of who we are, but because of who we are not.
Mhm.
And if you realize that what they're doing is just a chemically induced vitriol, that they're not evil. Because my guess is they're going to go home and they're going to probably
Yeah.
kiss their wives and tuck their kids into bed and go to work and be good dudes. At least that's my hope. But in this moment, the oxytocin is causing them to feel that kind of like tribal war of
Mhm.
us versus them. And what's really neat is you'll see this with some professional teams where they'll say and create logos like us versus everybody or us versus the
Mhm.
world. Like that's an induction of oxytocin intent. What's nice is, or what I try to alter, like when coaches want to do that kind of oxytocin stuff, what I try to encourage is I think we can create an oxytocin bond without identifying an enemy. Like, yes, it's easier to do
Mhm.
that, and we see it in politics a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, all we have to do is make people afraid of another party and we'll rally together. But we can also just focus on it just being about us. There's a team that I work for right now, and one of their cheers that they say as a collective is they say, just us. And I always respect that. I think that's so brilliant because it's always a reminder. Like, that's how they break their huddles, just us. I think that's
Mm.
just a really beautiful way to make sure that we feel that oxytocin bond.
Wow. Interesting. Let's talk
Thank you.
about the creation of AIQ. How did the
Sure.
idea, yeah, how did the idea, Scott, for the AIQ come about? Was there a specific moment when you realized this was something the sports world needed?
I was in grad school learning about intelligence theory.
Hmm.
And I went, gosh, we always talk about how this player reminds us of some other future former player, of legend. And we often talk about how they're big and strong and fast like this guy. This guy's as fast as this previous Hall of Famer. But I said, I wonder about intelligence. Like, how does anyone ever think about using intelligence as part of the formula of what makes somebody great? So I started to look at the puzzle of sport and the definition of sport. I said, what is sport in its essence? I said, sport is this constantly mutating puzzle. It can't be solved. The second we think we've got it, I mean, if it were solved, think about how boring it would be. You just go, "Oh, this team's gonna win because they've got the pieces that this other team doesn't." So there's all of these permutations. I mean, it's sport in its own way is like this living, breathing organism. It's super cool because it's constantly mutating. So I was like, how does someone go about navigating that? So once I came up with this idea that sports is this unsolvable mutating puzzle, I went, okay, what do you need in order to take it on? And I came up with this comprehensive athletic profile. I said, okay, one bucket is their physical abilities, right? Like to play the game of basketball, you have to have at least some relative height, for rebounding. It's an advantage. It's not the only way to be successful, but it's an advantage. I said, okay. And then the next bucket was like experience. How much time and attention have you put into your sport? Like, I think what's really fascinating is you watch some talented individuals who are coming from really far away places. Like right now in America, there's a lot of people who are looking at the continent of Africa for players that are physically gifted, even though they have never been experienced in the sport that they're being evaluated for. So you go, okay, experience. How much have they played this sport? How much do they know this sport? How many reps do they have? Have they played this since they were 6? Like in the English Premier League, it's fascinating, right?
Hmm.
Like some of these kids join these academies at 6 years old, so they're just getting these high fidelity reps. It's amazing. And then the third bucket was personality, right? Is this guy going to make everyone around him better or make everyone around him worse? Is he locker room glue or locker room poison? And then the fourth bucket was intelligence. How do you go about solving the puzzle from between your ears? Like, How do you see the game so that you're in the right place at the right time to make the right play? And so I went to my partner, Jim Bowman. He was also in grad school at the time. And I said, "Hey, I've got this idea. Like, what do you think, man?" And he goes, it's a really cool idea. And I happen to work for a woman named Dawn Flanagan, who's one of the legends of intelligence theory. He goes, "I
Mhm.
think I can help you construct this thing so that it really follows best science and really empirical validation practice." So we spent about 15 years, he and I, and we didn't just look at sports. We looked at other places where unsolvable puzzles existed, like firefighters and police officers and military. And we just said, okay, what are the cognitive abilities that you need? So when you think about, like, say, a center midfielder, a center midi, who's scanning down the pitch and trying to look at where to pass the ball. Do I make a through ball to the nine? Is the nine checking two? Like all of those kinds of details. How does he go about making that decision making? Like, what's his processing speed? What's his reaction time like? What's he doing to kind of figure this stuff out? Is very similar to the way a firefighter who kicks a door down and instantly scans for the threats and danger of the fire, as well as people to be rescued. So we took that concept, again, 15 years, and then we brought it to market, and now we're working with teams all over the world. It's amazing. We're with teams in all 5 major leagues in the United States and North America.
Mhm.
We're with Olympic training facilities. We're in Europe with English Premier League teams and other European, premier leagues like La Liga and stuff.
Mhm.
And then we're in Australia and New Zealand, and it's I think another kind of element or backbone to this was throughout my 30 years of working with teams, I've never met a player who really loves to be just yelled at. I just haven't. And even though some coaches have done it, I've never met a coach who really feels good about themselves for doing it.
Mhm.
They might justify it and say, "Hey, it was necessary. That guy needed to be yelled at." But they never like they're often exhausted, they're often kind of worked up
Yeah.
and it takes a while to come, but no one's really excited about it. So I said, if no one really likes yelling, the experience, why does that happen? And I said, I think there's a disconnect. And maybe it's because the player, has a bit of a learning disability in a way. Like he's big, strong, and fast, but he's not doing the right thing. So,
Mhm.
the old adage is he either doesn't know or he doesn't care. And so I think the default has always been like, he just doesn't love the game enough. Or it's like, well, what if he does love the game, but he just doesn't see it? So we created this thing in the hopes that it would help repair the relationship between the player and the coach, that it would help the coach get the best out of the player, that would help the player get the best out of his own abilities. Like well-informed people make good decisions.
Mhm.
That's sort of the origin of the
Yeah.
AIQ.
Yeah. And on that, for the listeners, can you break down how the AIQ works? How does it measure what, let's say, what traditional IQ tests don't?
Yeah, sure. So I just need to take a sip there for a sec. So so let's start with the theoretical construct. And forgive me for getting all nerdy, but I think the fact that we are an empirically validated measure matters. Because in psychology, because of how poorly defined psychology can be in sports, it invites itself to a lot of people who might be trying to work a con, right? Like there's so many ways to win a game and so many ways to lose a game, and it's hard to really pinpoint. So I notice how sometimes con artists, they'll take a whole lot of credit for a win, right? And I'm like, I'm not so sure that that's what caused the win. I think it's a whole lot of things. So I like the fact that we come from a science backed and a science based thing. So the predominant theory of intelligence is a theory called the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory of intelligence. It's the gold standard. And if you look at intelligence measures around the world, the most frequently used ones, the Wechsler scales, the Woodcock-Johnsons, the Stanford-Binets, they are all used by, they all are based by the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory,
Mhm.
CHC theory. So Jim Bowman, my partner, in his wisdom, he was like, "I think we should base this off of CHC theory."
Okay.
I said, "Great." So one of the elements that we did was we said, "Okay, we want to make sure that this is robust to um, culture, race, religion, socioeconomic status." So the fact that someone from like the inner city of Miami can take the AIQ, and someone from Ghana can take the AIQ, and someone from Thailand can take the AIQ is kind of cool that there's no cultural bias there. Um, so we eliminated a lot of the kinds of things that could cause an inaccurate score. So we started with that.
Mhm.
Then we really zeroed in on what were the abilities that were most necessary and most valued to get the job done in those unsolvable situations. We ended up coming up with 4 broad abilities and 10 narrow abilities. Overall, we have 15 points of data and discussion. So when we try to figure out how a player does what they do, not are they capable of it, but really how do they do it? They're already capable. They wouldn't be at
Yeah.
this level if they
Mm.
weren't. Once you know how someone does it, then you can unlock it and repeat it. What's the old adage? That which can be measured can be rewarded, and that which can be rewarded can be repeated. So I think putting people in really good positions for success and then maximizing that opportunity is great. And the only way to really do that is to be super well informed with really understanding how they do things.
Mm.
So that's what we did. We've published 4 peer-reviewed white papers that show statistically significant correlation with on-field performance.
Mhm.
There's 3 in the NFL, 1 in the NBA, and 1 in Major League Baseball. So actually, sorry, we're up to 5 papers now, which is
Okay.
super exciting.
Mhm.
Um, and what's nice about that is, again, trying to avoid the reputation of psychology being a con artist industry. We had other people, not ourselves as owners of the company, we had other people, professors who were the principal authors of these papers. And when they submitted them to academic journals, we weren't part of that process. That was something where they went through a high level of scrutiny to make sure that this isn't just some company trying to like favor the outcome.
Yeah.
And and so the fact that we found things that were important and with meaningful stuff, like in basketball, it's effective field goal percentage, which is a major statistic. In football, it's like quarterbacks ability to turn the ball over or scoring touchdowns. I mean, like major stuff.
Mm.
Baseball, it was like, key hitting and pitching
Yeah.
statistics. Um, the AIQ takes about 35 minutes to administer. It's done on an iPad. Again, it's not language based, so that way anyone anywhere can take it.
Mhm.
Once they finish the 35-minute exercise, the 2 things that I hear from athletes that take it is they go, "Wow, that was really hard." And I always remind them, like, it has to be because if we made it easy, then we would have this ceiling effect where everybody would score high. We're trying to get this really nice curve,
Mhm.
beautiful distribution. But the other thing that we hear a lot is, "Hey, that was a lot of fun." It's like playing games like Candy Crush and stuff. So they
Okay.
found it to be challenging, but they also found it to be fun.
Mhm.
Once they hit submit, it goes into our portal, at which point the player and the team can download a report, and the report gives them a score across those 15 data
Mhm.
points. But it also gives them, yeah,
Sorry, Scott, the report is instant or it takes time?
the report is instant.
Okay.
We now have it automated. When we developed the report, I asked coaches from each sport. I leveraged some of my relationships. So with football, I asked NFL coaches. With baseball, I asked MLB coaches,
Mhm.
basketball, NBA coaches. With soccer and European football, I asked some premier coaches. So what I wanted to do was to minimize the learning curve of like, so one of our abilities is called spatial awareness. And it's like, well, what is spatial awareness? And so not only do we talk about what spatial awareness is, we talk about how it can be used in basketball versus how it can be used in football. But then we go one step further and talk about not just how can it be used in football, it's how can it be used for a 9 versus a midfielder versus a defender kind of thing. And with the new mode of positionless versatility in sports, it's not just how can this be used for like a point guard in basketball, but also how can this be used for the primary ball handler? So we're really just helping people understand. And then the other thing that I'm super proud of, and you're actually the first person that I've released this information to publicly. So like this is kind of like a
Oh,
premiere.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and the only reason is because it's coming out. I think we're going to release it tomorrow. Is
Okay.
we created an AI bot. We created an athletic intelligence bot. We call it the AIQ Plus.
Mhm.
And what's fascinating is we fed the AIQ Plus 297 documents of sport and sport specific intelligence
Mhm.
theory.
Mhm.
We gave it 297 documents just on that. Then I asked some of those coaches that I had friends with, they gave me their playbooks. Like a couple NFL coaches gave me their NFL playbooks. We
Wow.
fed it that.
Yeah.
Then we gave it our database so that it understood the data. So now with this AIQ Plus, you can type in a question like, hey, how do these two players compare? How would you develop this player?
Mhm.
Is this player a good fit for our system that we run? And this AIQ Plus spits out an answer that's amazing. I was talking to an NFL team that had a rookie quarterback. I was talking to the quarterback coach for an NFL team with a rookie quarterback. And I said, what would you want to ask the AIQ Plus if you could ask it anything? He goes, what would be the best way to develop our quarterback? So I typed it in. 30 seconds later,
Wow,
it
the
gave
whole
this list. I said, is this accurate? He goes, oh my God. He goes, this thing is 100% spot on. He's like, it's scary how accurate. And this is everything I'm planning to do with the quarterback this off season. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah. Impressive. Absolutely mind-blowing. And
Thank you.
we spoke earlier during our intro chat about the decision making. Sports often boils down to split-second decisions. What cognitive skills, Scott, are most crucial in these moments?
I think it depends on the task, right? So like if we're going to talk about the world of soccer, European football,
Hmm.
goalkeepers, I mean, I think it's really important for goalkeepers to have things like really good reaction time. I also think it's really important for them to have good navigation, the ability to see kind of like attacking angles. So that way, when they step forward and they shut down the striker, that they can kind of cover the frame of the goal in a way because they're playing angles, right? Now, when you think about a midfielder, that navigation is less about covering the angles of the frame to
Hmm.
protect the goal, but more about passing lanes and passing windows. So it really depends on the task and the responsibility of the player. And that's again across all domains. Like if we're talking about American football now, it's like a quarterback's ability to read the defense
Hmm.
before he snaps the
Before
ball,
it's,
like
yeah.
identifying the coverage. So when you say like what cognitive abilities are most important, like the ones that we cover, the 15 that we cover, I think they're all equally important in different ways for different positions.
Mm.
I think one thing that happens in sports is people want quick and easy answers. The speed of sport is so fast. People just want to know, is this a good score or is this a bad score? Which we don't do. We don't talk about good scores or bad scores. We talk about high scores and low
Low
scores
scores, yeah.
and what you can do with them. And the reason why is like, this is not a judgment. This is just data. It's like, how fast can this guy run? And how quickly can he process the game as, if he's playing defense, let's use an
Mm.
NBA basketball example, you've got a guy who's defending a fast break where it's 3-on-1. So there's three opponents, one with the ball and two that are coming out on the sides, and he's got to make a decision. Do I stop the ball or do I defend the pass? And normally you go, hey, it's a no-brainer. Stop the ball is the first and foremost responsibility. But if he's been watching game film and he knows that the primary ball handler is a person who's not very good at shooting and is most likely to pass to one of the better shooters who's on the break.
Mm.
Well, that's a cognitive ability that's called learning efficiency, the ability to download information from the install and
Mm.
the scouting report, and the ability to recall it later in that moment that he needs it.
Mm.
So sometimes, it's about recalling information you've been taught. Sometimes it's about having like that pattern recognition, which most people will talk about as like instinct. Oh man, he's got great instincts. Well, I think instincts is based off of pattern recognition. There's anticipation, which I think has a lot to do with one of our abilities. We call it manipulation rotation, which is the ability to see things unfold before they do.
Hmm.
So again, people want quick and easy answers, but I think sports is complicated. I think human beings are complicated. I think human beings in sports is a multiplier of complication because of all the permutation. And I think intelligence is complicated. So as much as some people want just like a, hey, give me like the number one cognitive ability to focus on. It's like, honestly, it's the nature of understanding intelligence in its entirety really unlocks what makes it special
Yeah.
and impactful.
And Scott, are there similarities between cognitive demands in sports and other high stakes fields like the military, for example, or firefighters?
Yeah, 100%, right? So again, let's just take the concept of anticipation. So I think anticipation is a combination of being able to see things, then being able to digest what you're seeing and then what it would look like as it evolves, and then knowing what you see and imagining how it would evolve and how that relates to something you already know. So if I were to pull that out from the AIQ, I would say the ability to see things is something we call multiple target search. It's a scanning task. Then the ability to feel that flow is manipulation rotation. We call it manipulation rotation. And then the ability to tap into something that you've been exposed to is learning efficiency. So what does that look like in the military? Again, a guy who's in an urban warfare situation kicks a door down and has to quickly identify threats and dangers. So he's scanning. He sees something like maybe a bulge in a pocket or underneath a jacket. And he goes, I know that the evolution of a bulge in a jacket with a hand going into it. So he's scanning and he sees the hand and the going towards the bulge. He's going, most likely than not, what's coming out next is going to be a weapon or a threat. That's anticipation. That's a cognitive ability. Now, same kind of thing would be in a sports setting where, let's take football, the American football. You're a defensive back and you see the wide receiver have his hands to his side versus you see the wide receiver with his hands up and you go, okay, his hands are up. So he's scanning, he sees his hands up and he sees his hands are flared and he goes, okay, what's likely to come next is the receiver's going to put his hands out and block me. And I know this because when I watched install meetings and I watched game film this week, my coach told me that when his hands are down, he's most likely going to get ready to run a route and catch a ball. Yeah. But when his hands are up, he's looking to catch. When his hands are up, he's looking to block.
To block, yeah.
So these kinds of cognitive abilities, I think, give you massive competitive advantages because of the speed of the game. The sooner you figure out what's going on and what to do to stop it or to get it done, the better off you are.
Yeah. Now on that, Scott, how does AIQ help athletes improve their decision-making under pressure? If you can give us an example or two.
Yeah, so I think pressure is more of an emotional or psychological construct, right? Pressure is a construct based off of assigned meaning. You know, pressure is only because I feel a sense of threat or danger. So one of the ways that we can minimize pressure is with preparation. If I'm ready for the moment, I'm not under pressure. This is what I've been doing my whole life. Like, it's amazing when you think about some of these Red Bull athletes that do these amazing stunts that you're like, oh my God, how does this guy jump out of an airplane with no parachute and stuff like that? And you're like, this is unreal. What kind of pressure they must be feeling. But I think that those individuals have been doing that for so long that for them, walking a tightrope across 2 buildings that are 100 stories tall feels natural to them, almost to the equivalent of us brushing our teeth, because that's how often they've done it. So, I think when we talk about decision making and intelligence it is a huge advantage to minimizing the pressure of the moment
Yeah.
because they can read the situation and feel a level of familiarity. Oh, this isn't as hard or as challenging because I know how to do this. I know what to do here. I have the answers to the test.
Yeah. Yeah. Clear. You've worked with athletes facing all kind of mental challenges, Scott. How do you help someone differentiate between mental performance and emotional resilience?
See, it's funny because that goes back into what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation.
Hmm.
Why are we separating these things? Like, I
Yeah.
think what's interesting is it's a blend and a blur, and it's also bidirectional. Like, I think some of the mental health can impact the performance, and some of the performance can, like, the direction goes in both ways. So I'm always thinking to myself, let's just try to understand the problem. What's the task? What's the challenge? What's the threat? What's the opportunity? And let's break it down and then figure out how do we assemble the pieces of the puzzle so that way a person can execute versus being like, hey, I'll take this part. And then someone else goes, I'll take that part. I've never understood the bifurcation of work. Um, I was working with an NFL team, I won't say which one, where the nutritionist was prescribing an probiotic and the doc was prescribing an antibiotic, and the athlete was having stomach issues, and they they thought he was having an anxiety attacks. He was
Mhm.
anxious, and that's why, because he kept kind of like, it was at practice. He was like, "Oh, my stomach's upset," and they're like, "Nah, you're just faking it." Kind of. So they brought him to me, and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "I'm not anxious." I go, "Okay, I believe you." Like, why even start there? And he goes, "Because everybody keeps telling me that my stomach's a mess because I'm anxious." And I was like, "Well, but you're saying you're not." He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Then they also think I'm trying to get out of practice, which I'm not. Like, I'd rather be at practice." Well, it turns out what he was doing was he was taking his antibiotics in the morning. He was taking his probiotics at around 10 o'clock, and practice was at 11. So it was kind of like all these things. So he and I just said, "Look, walk me through your day." And, it took a couple of us, and to his point, like, there wasn't anything that was really psychologically pinging in the conversation. And then as he was walking me through the details of the day, he reached out to me and said, "Hey," I mean, he revealed to me that he was having, he's taking all these different cocktails.
Mm.
So I reached out to the nutritionist and the team doc. I said, "Hey, let's do like a case study where we're all comparing notes." And that was it. So I guess that was a long-winded story. And again, I feel like I'm rambling in today's conversation, but the idea is well-informed people make really good decisions. And the more we fully understand the person and the situation, the better off we are. Like, I am a big believer that performance is the formula of talent times environment. So what is going on within the talented person and what is going on around the talented person that's eliciting either great performance or a disrupted performance. And if we can kind of figure these things out and the relationship between them, I think we can get a lot of really cool things done. It's a
Yeah.
hard formula.
Mm.
I feel like the longer I've been in this and the more that I feel like I've learned, the less I know. I feel like the stupid, like, it's like I see sometimes, like, again, like on Instagram or LinkedIn, these people that have all these answers. And I'm like, gosh, man, they're so brilliant. How did they get these answers? I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Like, the more I've been around, and it's so funny. Like, I watch, one video will be like, "Hey, man, you just got to be chill and zen and be totally mindful." And the other video, like right after it, is like, "Go be a warrior and go be, just be a monster in beast mode." And I'm like, well, which is it? Am I supposed to be chill on and still minded, or am I supposed to be like this determined, fearless, intense guy? I don't get it.
Yeah.
So it's like probiotics and antibiotics. I just so
Yeah.
I'm left as mysterious as I first started on day one of this quest, which is kind of cool. I guess that's what's fun about sports and human beings.
It
It's
is. It is.
unsolvable.
Yeah. And Scott, did you try to apply IIQ in other sports? Let's say water sports, winter sports, modern sports, for example, or it's only now within team sports?
No, and that's just it. Like, and this is where I give Jim Bowman the lion's share of the credit. Like, we were trying to just to hit a bullseye that was how
Hmm.
comprehensive can we be? So we've had like golfers, for example, and we're
Hmm.
like, I don't know, like I never really thought about it being used for all. And then they explained to me, so I'd say, well, help me understand what are the cognitive tasks of golf. And then when they explain, I go, oh, that's multiple target search and target comparison. And I start thinking about some of the things that we measure. So we were working with an Olympic skiing team,
Hmm.
and the psychologist was a colleague of mine, and he's like, "Hey, I want to use the AIQ for the skiing team." And it was moguls and aerials,
Aerial, yeah,
jumps and stuff like that.
freestyle.
And, and the other group that he wanted to do it with was the sledders. So
Hmm.
luge, skeleton, bobsled, 2-man, 4-man, all that. So I go, look. I said, I'll be honest with you. I've never thought about it for that population. Um, I could see how some of these cognitive abilities would be more valuable than others, but we can do it. So we did it. What was amazing was we have a cognitive ability called visual retention, which is about like holding the vision in your mind's eye. Think like a Polaroid picture. Like you take a picture of a Polaroid,
Hmm.
and you know how it slowly reveals itself? So visual retention is like the opposite of that. Like imagine you were looking at a picture that was slowly fading away. It's like, how long can you hold this in your mind's eye? The sledders, the skeleton, luge, and bobsled teams, they had much higher visual retention. Their top performers had much higher visual retention. So I asked the psychologist who was working, I was like, is that an artifact or do you think there's something there? And again, like we didn't have any science to say like, hey, this is what's happening. He goes, one of the things that we value with the drivers is they have to, because like when you're sledding, you're kind of tucked in, like you're not really seeing the course, especially not from like an aerial view, like we as fans watching it. So he said they have to hold the image in their mind's eye so that way they can kind of anticipate the turns. And we're like, oh, that makes perfect sense why they're visual. So one thing that's been really fascinating is watching how certain cognitive abilities seem to have patterns and profiles with different sports. Like another example, we were doing some esports, some video game work,
Hmm.
which I was like, whoa, man. And what was interesting was they said, well, the gamers, because they're so electronic
Yeah.
driven, will they have a competitive advantage? I was like, I don't know. Like, turns out they didn't. They felt right within our elite sample of professional athletes. But what's interesting was the fighter stuff, which has a lot more to do with like, like the two guys are just sitting there punching each other and kicking each other video games. Those top performers had amazing reaction time. But then the first person shooter games that have like the 3-dimensional maps where you're going out and kind of like doing like capture the flag type quests, they had much better spatial awareness, knowing where they were in relation to space. So I think what's been really amazing is I haven't really found a sport where there wasn't some utility for the AIQ.
Hmm.
But I also am very cautious in saying that it is universal and it fixes all things. Again, that's where that con artist dialogue starts to kick in. Like
Yeah.
back in the 30s, those guys would go into town and say, this will, take this tincture and it'll help remove, your bursitis and your arthritis and your otheritis. And I think anybody that purports to have something that does everything for all people is something that I'm cautious about. So like when I was at the University of Michigan, the swim team wanted to use the AIQ.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, help me understand, like, because I don't know swimming. And they were like, well, we do have strategies like negative splits and cat and mouse kind of stuff. And I said, yeah, but I'm not so sure there's cognitive abilities. Like, I know that they're thinking, I know that they're smart, I know that there's awareness, but I'm just not so sure it's the same kind of cognitive abilities. So we ended up not doing it. Like, we just couldn't find something that was strong enough. But the diving team was like, "We do want to use it." Sure enough, the divers and the gymnasts did it, and their spatial awareness, knowing where they were in relation to spaces, they were rotating and flipping around. I was like, "Huh."
Yeah. I think sailing will benefit a lot from your solution.
We've not been with a sailing group. I would be very intrigued to see what that would
Yeah,
look like.
especially now the new format and the boats are so bloody fast, because now we use foiling. So basically, the entire boat, the entire hull is above the water, and the speed is just crazy. And the race course is so tight. And when you have 7, 8, 10 boats, 50-foot boats that travel 40, 45, 50 knots of speed, when it comes, and you have a team of 6 to 7 people on each boat, when it comes to decision making, because you have the helmsman, the one steering, then you have the tactician, the one that called the shot, you know.
Yeah.
And since a long time, one of the thing I was doing as a coach is to try to understand the relation between the helmsman and the tactician, plus other crew members, because quite often things go so fast. The last thing you want is something goes wrong with the decision. Who will call the shot?
Yeah.
So I believe sailing will benefit from your solution.
It'd be awesome. It's funny, like, one thing as I was listening to you, it reminded me of the day I realized I would never be a professional soccer player. Um, when I was playing, I was not a very physically gifted guy. I wish I was. I gave everything I got, but I hated a wet field because the ball would skip and the passes were so fast. And because I'm a little bit slower, I felt like my strength was my ability to solve the puzzle, but my weakness was like my body just couldn't get to where I needed it to go. So the second that we would play on a wet field, I'm like, "Oh man, this is too fast. Like, my body can't move this quickly." And so I'm visiting with an English Premier League team, and they're watering their practices and they're watering their games. And I'm like, "What do you guys?" And they're like, "The players love it." And I'm like, "Because they're so fast, not just physically, but
Yeah.
mentally, right? Like, they can't wait for the ball to get to them fast enough." And so you're right. Like, I think one universal truth in almost all sports is that there is an element of speed to process. And whether it's hockey, soccer, football, basketball, like, it's all about, like, the clock is ticking, and the faster you can get the job done sailing. And so I think what's really fascinating is, like, we have a lot of speed emphasized in the AIQ because of that. So it's, again, the faster you can make that decision, the faster you
Yeah.
can scan and identify those important details.
Yeah.
Um,
When you look at, for example, downhill skiing, slalom, or alpine, or motorsports, for example, Formula One or NASCAR, when I see those athletes, either in a Formula One racing in Monaco, which is a street track, and everything is, there is no margin of error. But these guys, they visualize the entire track, including downhill skiers. So they visualize the entire track, and even prior the green light, they try to, in there for maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds, they try again all the time to memorize, visualize the track. And the minute they start, the decision making in terms of if something goes wrong or an issue that just popped up, negotiating a turn or slowing down or going fast, it comes to a split second, you know. And what's fascinates me all the time, and when I ask athletes why you took that decision, and most of the time there is no answer.
yeah. So, first of all, what a brilliant capture of a really powerful moment in sport. Intelligence is not just the ability to. So this gives us an opportunity to talk about the difference between knowledge and intelligence. Knowledge is what you know. like 2 plus 2 equals 4. Intelligence is how you learn or go about figuring out what 2 plus 2 is. Like, oh, I've got 2 apples here and I got 2 apples here. If I put them together, I have a 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 2 plus 2 equals 4. So when something is unexpected or unexplained, when it's unanticipated, like a play breaks down, like in your point, like, you're a Formula One driver and what you didn't anticipate was the car 3 ahead of you spins out and your vision is partially skewed from some of the debris or some of the dust that's kicking up or smoke or whatever. Intelligence is one of the better predictors of success because highly intelligent people have the ability to improvise. They have the ability to discard a calcified way of doing something. So instead of just being like, well, I just default to what I've always done, they can actually pull themselves off script. And so it's the ability to improvise, it's the ability to be creative, and it's the ability to change and change quickly. So one element that I think intelligence really impacts is managing the chaos when it's even at its most chaotic. So to your point, like when I've been there in that moment too, where the player makes this and you're like, how'd you do it? And the player goes, I don't know, it just made sense to me. I just felt it. Like that's intelligence. That's their manipulation rotation, their multiple target search, like all those things that we were talking about earlier, like all of those things start kicking in and then it's like, bam, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. So your solution help athletes, supports athletes. What kind of support through the data, through the findings that coaches take advantage to the way they approach the coaching for athletes, for example?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I always want to be respectful for coaches, and some of the coaches that I've been around, which are some of the best in the business, like, I've always found the really good coaches, they figure it out. They figure it out
Mm,
eventually, like what unlocks the player. The great ones figure it out faster. And I think when you're given an athletic profile that talks about like, here's how fast they are, here's how strong they are, here's how committed they are to their craft, and here's how intelligent they are. When you kind of figure out a profile and you get that on day one, it just speeds up the learning curve. So yes, coaches figure it out eventually, and great coaches figure it out faster. And I think this helps people with the speed of understanding what that player can do.
mhm, mhm. Where do you see AIQ in 5 years from now?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know because I see myself more as a psychologist than I do a business person. So when Jim and I created this thing, really, we just wanted to help people and give people information that no one else was giving them. I mean, it's kind of pioneering in that way. Like no one had this prior to the AIQ. And so I think where I would like it to be in 5 years is just continuing to help. And I feel like the more people it can help, the better. So where would I like to see it in 5 years? I'd like to see it in, you know, every team's DNA
Mm,
that really believes in developing and maximizing players' abilities.
yeah.
Again, its universality is what makes it kind of special. Like it can go anywhere and it can have an impact with just about anyone. Not every single sport. Again, I want to be
Mhm.
cautious. I'm not talking about like, hey, again, it cures bursitis. It doesn't. But I think if you go, gosh, how is it that that cricket player, is able to track the ball in the air and then be in the right position to make a play? Like that's the same as a baseball player who's, tracking the ball off the bat, and same as a safety in the NFL who's tracking the ball in the air when the quarterback makes the throw. So that's what we identified was how could we do really good across a wide
Mm,
variety of sports and also military, firefighters, first
yeah,
responders, et cetera.
yeah. And Scott, what advice would you give to coaches struggling to connect with players in today's fast-paced environment?
Listen and learn before intervention. Sometimes rushing. Sorry, let's see if I can come up with a sequential concept. Raise your frustration tolerance. so that you decrease your demand for an immediate solution. I know coaches are under a tremendous amount of pressure and demand to get results, but running into or executing a plan that is poorly executed can actually be a multiplier. So, what's the old adage? Like fools rush in. Take a few minutes to really stop. Once you go, then it's listen and learn.
Yeah.
Don't make
Yeah.
assumptions. You just don't know who this person is or what's going on. And then once you feel like you're well informed and you understand, then develop a game plan and then execute it with conviction. That's what I would give to coaches as a blueprint.
And for our listeners who might not be athletes, what are some everyday strategies or tips to improve decision making and adaptability?
I don't think there are easy answers. I guess if I was trying to come up with something to an audience of people that I don't know what's going on in their lives, it would be this. I don't think there's easy answers. Give yourself some grace and space to kind of try to figure it out. Seek the resources that you think will be helpful, and recognize that life is complicated and whatever situation you're in is complicated, and try to invest in identifying what resources you have accessible to you. And those resources can be internally, like what you've got inside you, as well as externally, like who you can ask for help around you.
Good. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Oh boy, here we go.
Ready for a speedy Q&A?
Yeah, and I'll be succinct in these answers for sure, or I'll try.
Let's do this. What's your favorite sports movie or a book?
I love The Natural. I love Hoosiers.
Okay.
Those are my two. Yeah.
Who is an athlete that inspires you?
Oh, there's a ton, but I grew up with Pele. What he did off the field was as amazing as what he did on it.
What's your morning routine?
Brush my teeth, get my kids out of bed, make them breakfast, go to the gym, and then take on whatever puzzle comes my way for that next moment.
Coffee or tea?
Both.
Both. You start with coffee?
Coffee, but decaf.
Decaf.
You wouldn't want to see me on caffeine. As verbal and as I've been on this call, caffeine makes it even worse.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. So caffeine, without it, I can't function.
Interesting.
Favorite travel destination, Scott?
Jemez, New Mexico. It's a hidden gem.
Sport you wish you had played?
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the soccer career that I had. Yeah, I'm happy with soccer. I'll stick with what I loved. Yeah.
Okay. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Don't eat yellow snow. No. Every lock has a key. My dad gave me that one once.
What's a life lesson sports have taught you?
It reinforced every lock has a key. I find a lot of times teams don't lose, they just run out of time. So I just keep going. Yeah.
Your best way to unwind after a tough day or a tough week?
The emotional support of my wife. I can't stress enough and value enough the impact and power of having a wonderful partner. God, this is a little embarrassing, but like if I'm really stressed out and she picks up on it, her emotional intelligence is amazing. If she picks up on it and she comes over and gives me like just like a little bit of like a head scratch where I get to kind of just lie in her lap and she gives me like a head, like that recharges me in a way that it's better than any caffeine I guarantee that you've ever had. So that would be my solution.
Nice, really nice. Scott, if you had the opportunity to have a dinner with a historical figure. Who will it be and why?
Oh,
Pick one.
Bechterev,
Why?
because I think he's an amazing psychologist who was an innovator of his time, and because he spoke truth and he spoke truth to power, even though it cost him his life.
What's a hobby or interest you have that might surprise people?
My oldest son and I, we like to distill liquored spirits. So we make vodka, we make bourbon, we make moonshine, um,
Have you tried
and
cognac?
yeah, and Russian cognac, just to add to the Bechterev. But yeah, and it's been a real treat to do that with him.
Love it.
It's all chemistry to him. Like, he's super smart, so he likes the chemistry of it, and I like to enjoy the results of what we've made. So it's a win for both of us.
Yeah. What's the most challenging moment in your career?
Being in a toxic environment, trying to help everyone that was in it as best I could. It felt a lot like pulling people out of a fire where the fire was just growing faster and hotter than I could keep up with.
hmm What was your favorite sports moment you've witnessed?
I've been so blessed to have been a part of some amazing things. I've been on sidelines of the NFL. I've been part of a world championship NBA team. Um, I don't know, like, I have like 7 different ones that come to my mind.
hmm
Um, it's interesting. I think what's really special is the locker room, especially as a psychologist when you're invited into the locker room. So there's nothing better than a locker room celebration, um, where you see all the hard work and everything else paying off. I would say
Yeah,
that was a moment that would be special for me.
nice. And lastly, piece of advice or a wisdom to our listeners on any topic.
Don't eat yellow snow. I'm going to keep doubling down on that till it finally answers its
I'm
answers
gonna
right.
use it. What
Um, I think the piece of advice that I would give is this: take some time and develop a mission statement.
Mm,
Come up with a concept that really resonates with you and what you want to do with your life. Um, and that way, when you're in an intense moment and you have some tough decisions to make, you can always default to that personal mission statement that you spent some time flushing out. Mine, and I don't mind sharing, mine is I just want to do cool stuff with cool people. And I have found, when given opportunities, when they fell under the rubric of like, that's a really cool idea, that's a really cool project, and the people that are engaged in this project are really neat thinkers or neat doers, like, every time I've done cool stuff with cool people, it's always been a very enjoyable experience, regardless of what the pay was. Versus I've done other opportunities that were more like pay driven or career ascension opportunity. They weren't as rewarding or as enriching. So for me, having a mission statement, a personal mission statement, has helped me make good decisions, especially when I've listened to it. I've often regretted when I disregarded the decision, or when I disregarded the mission statement.
mhm. Dr. Scott Goldman, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure having you on the show.
Uh, this was an absolute home run. I mean, I don't know sailing well enough but I mean, you ask awesome questions. This was unlike anything I've experienced in a really long time. So I can't thank you enough for the conversation. This was super cool. I hope your audience enjoys and pulls something out of it, because I feel like I just opened up my rib cage and gave you what I had. I shared things with you I don't think I've ever said publicly. So I really thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to please continue to do this. You are masterful at your craft.
Thank you.
And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. Great. Thank you for listening to this fascinating conversation with Dr. Scott Goldman. We explored the groundbreaking work behind the Athletic Intelligence Quotient, AIQ, how it's shaping sports and beyond, and the mental strategies that drive success. I leave you with a few words from Vince Lombardi. Perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk Podcast. I'm Sid Bensalah. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our show. Until next time, stay inspired and perform at your peak. Bye-bye.